Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Ira, if you can help with the slides so we can make a start. I hope you're all doing very well. Again, this is not a formal meeting. So again, no ties again, and we expect everyone to freely share and contribute to the conversations today. So again, a pleasure to welcome you all. Thank you so much for, again, finding the time to register and to join this interesting conversation on inclusive digital infrastructure that enables digital financial services in offline environments. I know it's a mouthful, and I'm sure a few of you will be wondering what we mean by offline environments or offline DFS. We would get to explain what these things are, and we hope the conversations that would follow, given the speakers we have, and again, insights and contributions from you, the members, would make this a worthwhile engagement today. We've designed this to be very informal. So again, we would encourage dialogue, we would encourage contributions, and we want it to be very active. So again, use the chat functions, raise your hands, and contribute to this conversation. Next slide. For those who do not know me, my name is Adeyemi Omotosho. I lead the DFS work stream, the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I'm here with some of my colleagues, and I'm also here serving all of you as your MC tonight. So I'll just provide some context to what we'll be doing, and I'll yield the floor to one of the chairs of the DFS working group. Next slide. Just to set the context, some quick housekeeping information for everyone. Again, given that this is virtual, we would ask that you keep your mic muted, especially when you're not speaking. But if you do want to speak, again, you can raise your hands, and that will signal to the moderator to call on you to provide your contribution. When you do speak, we encourage you switch on your videos so our colleagues can recognize you and again, follow the conversation. But if this proves difficult, given the internet bandwidth, do not worry. You can actually communicate without the video. But while you're not speaking, if you can, we ask that you keep your video off so we can, again, minimize distractions during the conversation today. Like I said, we want this to be very engaging, so we encourage you to please use the chat function. You can introduce yourself there, say hello to colleagues, so again, everyone finds out how you're doing. Again, share your insights, share your thoughts, share your contributions. If you agree with the point, please indicate this. We would like to, again, follow these conversations. And if you have specific questions to any of the speakers we have tonight, or to any of the colleagues sharing from their own experience, again, you can use the Q&A function here on Zoom to again, provide your answers. And we will encourage everyone, please go through the Q&A once in a while. And again, if you see any questions you can actually address, even though you're not a speaker, we encourage you to please provide your own feedback, your own insight, and contribute to the conversation that way. One final point I would make is our conversations today would be in English. Unfortunately, we do not have translation available for this. So we do encourage, we apologize in advance to our Francophone and Spanish and Portuguese and Arabic and Russian colleagues. But we do hope that you're all able to follow the conversation and contribute as well. Without much ado, I'll just provide some quick context to why we are here. As you all know, again, within the DFS working group, which is one of the 7 working groups within AFI, we do try our best to, again, figure out what are the emerging topics that are of concern or of priority to members. And in our last meeting in May, in Eswatini this year, members indicated, again, this topic of how do we really discuss and figure out what is really going on in offline environments. And usually we refer to this in environments or location where you have low connectivity, where you have low broadband or internet penetration, and we find people still yearning to have access to digital financial services. So the conversation started from this, but we've also seen examples where not by design or not by circumstance, people would be in this situation. But we've seen scenarios whereby either through climate-related events or emergencies, through social unrest, we do have, even in urban areas, situations where you would have blackout periods with no internet connectivity, where infrastructure might be damaged. So what happens? What happens if our cash light or cashless policies have actually worked and everybody now depends 100% on digital payments? What would happen in those scenarios? And behind all of this, we also recognize again, the value of having the right infrastructure in place. And so the conversation today is trying to put all of these pieces together to look at what offline DFS means, what DFS in offline environment means, and ultimately, we also look at what infrastructure will support these two scenarios and make it build on it for resilience purposes. Next slide. So just to again summarize why we are here. So why are we having this conversation today? We all know that rural communities, dispersed islands, particularly for colleagues from the Pacific, and remote communities sometimes face barriers when it comes to access to meaningful financial services, particularly the digital financial services. And sometimes we can attribute this directly to limited connectivity or internet. But this problem is not new. It persists, and we've seen innovations and we've seen approaches to actually solve the problem. And again, we can see very good examples from Africa to Latin America, all the way down to Asia, where we've seen solutions built on rails like USSD, SMS, our typical mobile money solutions that have been able to transform, again, that exclusion rate for this segment or these locations into the good news and success stories we see today. But what next? So like I said earlier, what more can we do? Are we to continue to intentionally design DFS solutions for offline environments? Or are we supposed to figure out ways to build resilience? So regardless of the scenarios of the future that we cannot even predict today, we are 100% certain that the infrastructure we built or the solutions we have there in the market would actually succeed. So this really is why we are here tonight, to have this conversation, to really see, is there really a gap? Is there an opportunity here? Are there challenges we are not seeing that we can address? And ultimately, what can we take forward as policymakers or as regulators or supervisors when it comes to addressing the specific needs of these segments and also building resilience? Next slide, please. So just for context, and so that we're all on the same page before we start the conversation, I just wanted to share with you quickly what we mean by these terms. So every time we use the term offline DFS, which is offline digital financial services, we are basically referring to financial services offered on a digital rail. So again, typical mobile money wallets, but that use technology such as USSD, SMS, or offline capable wallets. So usually, like most of you will know for mobile money, even if you use a feature phone without internet connectivity, you still have access to financial services and it's still digital in nature. And every time we refer to DFS in offline environments, so now we are more specific to the location, geographical location of specific situational place. We are basically looking at DFS solutions that were designed for those kind of environments in mind. And this, you would see examples of points of sale that would otherwise work perfectly when there's internet connectivity. But anytime there's a disruption to internet connectivity, they fall back on different rails and still facilitate transactions. So again, this is an intentional design for DFS tools or channels to work in such environments. And finally, when we say inclusive digital infrastructure, we're just talking about the shared systems or platforms or technologies that make all of these things happen. And we'll look at this also from the access, the usage, quality, but more importantly, the resilience point of view. So these basically are the terms we are discussing tonight, and I hope this clarifies for everyone. Next slide. So why does all of this matter? I think all of this matter. Why? Because we all agree we need to expand access and usage and the quality of financial services to this specific population. We preach digital inclusion, we preach innovation, but at the end of the day, when innovation becomes a barrier in itself, how do we address this? So this is one thing we hope we address today. Secondly, how do we now build resilient DFS systems? And I'm speaking broadly beyond our disaster recovery, cloud computing or cloud servers, having multiple locations. What happens when we have that doomsday scenario? like we see in the movies, everything is out. And we are back to the Stone Ages. What will happen to financial transactions? What would happen to digital payment, peer-to-peer payment? How do you pay merchants? How do you pay for services? And have we really considered all scenarios and have we built for them? Is something we would like to discuss. And finally, we begin to see this intentional design, even in this new age, for offline DFS. And the clear example here is usually when we have conversations around central bank digital currency, we see specific use cases or experiments around the offline capabilities of these new forms of money. So it begs the question, do we continue to intentionally design for offline environment, or is this not something we should focus on as regulators? Next slide. And that question mark there is something I put in just to emphasize why I think it's important for us to have this conversation on intentionality. Do we intentionally keep solutions that would work in offline environments as a regulator or as a provider? Is this something we should intentionally do? Just as a scenario or as a backup in case platforms fail or technologies fail? And we've seen several examples of this. Next slide. So at the end of the day, what do we hope to establish or to achieve? One, we want to establish, again, what DFS in offline environment or offline DFS means or contributes when it comes to the access, usage, and quality of financial services. And secondly, like I mentioned, again, how do we actually now begin to plan comprehensive resilience approaches or tools or frameworks as regulators? And finally, as it supports, again, all the different mandates that we have as regulators, how do we start to lay that groundwork as a working group to take these conversations forward? So with this context, I hope I've provided some, again, insight into what we'll be discussing today. And I hope it has excited you to, again, want to contribute to this conversation. So to take us forward, it's my pleasure to invite Tammy, the co-chair for the DFS working group, again, to take this conversation forward. Thank you very much, Tammy. The floor is yours.
Yep, thank you, Ademi, for really setting the tone and explaining the background and what we are hoping to achieve with today's workshop. So good morning, good evening, everybody. It is really great to see everyone on today's virtual workshop on inclusive digital infrastructure enabling DFS and offline environments. So as Yemi introduced me earlier, my name is Tajman Toya, or Tammy Bold. I currently work as the Senior Supervisor at the Financial Regulatory Commission of Mongolia, and I also serve as the DFS Working Group's co-chair currently, and I'm very delighted to be your moderator for the session. So today we will explore the opportunities, the challenges, and the impacts of providing DFS in offline environments, and I realized how crucial and very significant this topic was just now as I experienced a hour or 2 hour long power outage where I didn't have any electricity or I didn't have any internet connection. So throughout the session, we'll also delve into the opportunities that offline DFS technologies present for reaching the unbanked and underbanked populations and the challenges of implementing these solutions at scale and their actual broader impact on financial ecosystem as a whole. So today we are joined by a very esteemed panel of experts who will provide great insights and their experiences into this critical topic. So we have Mr. Kendi Kipkombe Sawe, who is the Public Policy and Advocacy Director of Mobile Money at GSMA. We also have Mr. Brian Mutera, who's the Executive Head of Mobile Financial Policy and Regulation at Vodacom. And last but not least, we have Ms. Jacqueline Imper, who is a financial inclusion enthusiast and DFS expert who also works as the head of agency banking at EcoBank Group. So before we begin, just a quick reminder, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom platform to submit your questions throughout the session, and we'll try to address as many as we can during the Q&A segment. So without further ado, let me hand over the virtual stage to our first speaker. So our first speaker will be Mr. Kendi Kipkombe Sawe. So Mr. Sawe has a vast experience in this intersection of telecoms and financial services, and will give us a detailed experiences in how we can enable offline DFS. So Mr. Sawe, over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and many thanks to Afi for providing this opportunity to speak on this very important topic. I think the introduction has informed that, I work with the GSMA. I lead our work on mobile money policy. I'm based in Africa, but I've also previously worked with a mobile operator in Kenya called Safaricom, where I also had the opportunity to get firsthand experience on some of the issues we're going to discuss today. I also appreciate that the conversation we are having is not entirely focused on financial services, because we're also going to be speaking on connectivity issues. But then again, we would not have mobile money without mobile phones. And I think it's very important. So I will contextualize some of the things we have witnessed as GSMA and some of the solutions we think we can also propose as an industry association. For those who are not aware, GSMA is an industry association that represents the views of telco operators and mobile money operators across the world. So just to start off with the first slide, so perhaps you can project the next slide. I think it may be good just to appreciate what the experience is for offline DFS. I'd like to begin by saying that a significant majority of consumers who use mobile money actually do not have access to the internet, or rather, they're using phones which cannot access internet. Within the industry, we call them feature phones, and this is something critical to have at the back of our minds. Currently, we have over 1.2 billion registered mobile money customers who are using this. And obviously, a significant majority of them live in low connectivity regions or even rural areas, if I could put it that way. But one of the things we've also noticed based on our research at the GSMA is that, and this is according to the latest State of Mobile Internet Connectivity Report, mobile broadband coverage expanded to over 96% of the world's population in 2023. However, that leaves a coverage gap of about 4%, meaning 4% of the world's population lived in an area not covered by broadband. So there's still quite a number of people who are not covered. And obviously, the impact of this is, mobile networks have expanded financial inclusion, reaching quite a significant number of people, but in an offline mode, if we could put it that way. Specific challenges need to be overcome, specifically to close the coverage gap further. Most least developed countries have lower levels of human and economic development, and many are vulnerable to economic shocks. And this makes it very challenging to sustainably invest in the technology that we require to be able to expand coverage. Nevertheless, in this context, connectivity is still critical. And this is one of the things we would like to highlight today on how the industry specifically has been able to bridge this gap quite significantly in an offline, setup. Next slide. So I think it's good to just now get to understand what it means for the industry to be able to provide financial services in an offline setting, to consumers who are using handsets which cannot be able to use internet, and to be able to ensure that they are financially included. Now, according to our research as the GSMA, 40% of rural areas still lack adequate mobile network coverage. And so this is an effort that, in as much as the industry is able to balance to understand whether they're able to make revenue or not, there's still an issue around being able to cover the entire population that actually needs, connectivity. And there have been several, innovations around how to be able to ensure that this is done. And there have been some needs which have also arisen from this. Now, base station solutions, and I will try not to use jargon for those who may not understand, the language that we use as an industry. Base stations, which are basically the aerials that we use to create connectivity, for mobile phones. These solutions, usually for rural and remote locations, are among the more commercially developed innovations currently. So this is basically the best way to create connectivity. Now, they've been able to help us create cell site innovations, which focus on providing lower costs, simplified to modular infrastructure, including light towers that are cheaper and less complex to deploy. So it's good to have that context at the back of our minds. Now, more radical wide area cell site solutions, such as high altitude platform stations, aim to reduce the cost of providing coverage to a larger or more dispersed population, but they have yet to be proven in a commercial setting. So there's still a lot of innovation around how the kind of technology which would be most efficient, despite currently having what is working. Now, one of the things that we have done as a GSMA, and that which we really pride ourselves in, is to be able to support the development of innovation around this space, to just make sure that there's cheaper connectivity, particularly for the underserved. Now, in 2020, one of the teams within the GSMA, we call it the GSMA Innovation Fund for Rural Connectivity, was awarded a grant to ISAT Africa to test their mobile connectivity solution for unconnected rural communities. ISAT Africa's project implemented an innovative solution that used concrete towers, solar power, and an open radio access network to provide 2G and 3G connectivity. So 2G and 3G connectivity is really one of the basic forms of connectivity currently that does not, in as much as it provides internet, really is the form of connectivity that most of the users of mobile money services can have access to. And so this was quite significant in this particular initiative. ISAT were able to deploy a combination of satellite and terrestrial links to backhaul the traffic to MTN Uganda Data Center. And there was an 18-month pilot which found out that the combination of backhaul using different technologies proved to be successful in connecting 5 sites, which generated around $9,000 per month in total revenue. MTN Uganda subsequently contracted ISAT Africa to continue managing on operating sites in a commercial basis. So this is just basically one of those innovations that we were able to drive to be able to mitigate this. This is a way of illustrating this, and also just underscoring the importance of partnership when it comes to addressing the issues of connectivity. At the end of the day, most of the solutions we have cannot be met just by one provider, but through partnerships. Next slide. Now, one of the things that obviously we are discussing today is the technologies that we've been able to use to create connectivity in an offline mode. Now, the beauty about the way mobile connectivity is currently set up is that you do not need internet connection to transact on mobile money. And many of us may already understand that mobile money services operates through USSD. And USSD is a form of technology that actually does not need any form of connectivity. For those who may have interacted with mobile money, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, you would realize that there are certain command prompts that you're able to dial on your phone, which is not able to access internet, and to be able to still access your mobile money wallet and to be able to undertake your payment transaction or whatever transaction that you do intend to undertake using your mobile phone. Now, this is something that we pride ourselves as an innovation, in as much as we do appreciate that there's room to be able to drive the usage of, smartphones and phones which can be able to access internet. I think it's also good to appreciate as well the context within which we provide mobile money, particularly of the consumers who use mobile money, who in many cases may also not be internet savvy, and they would require very simplified solutions to be able to access, internet, to be able to access financial services. Now, as an emerging technology, I think USSD continues to really become a showstopper in this space at this point, and we continue to look into other viable ways to be able to create offline forms of connectivity to this kind of consumers. Next slide. Now, one of the things we were also tasked to discuss is how, as GSMA, we strive to create collaboration and within the industry, within the wider industry, and just to make sure that all parties concerned are able to play their part. So as a mobile industry association, we are quite big on facilitating collaboration between regulators and private sector. We pride ourselves in being able to just bring together these different parties to be able to agree on solutions which can be able to support both sides, either in driving financial inclusion as a policy, at the same time just making sure that mobile services and other forms of services continue to be financially sustainable. Now, our role as GSMA also is in driving partnerships such as the one I mentioned, of driving that collaboration between ISAT and MTN Uganda, and many other forms. We are also big in making sure that as an industry, we are speaking one language. We have a diverse membership that cuts across different countries, and so we're able to bring the industry to do initiatives together. That also forms a part of what we do. We also do provide input on regulatory sandboxes, which of course create test environments for innovations to be studied and of course to be able to, before they're implemented by regulators. But last but not least, which I think I may have mentioned, GSMA also provides insights and also facilitates facilitates public-private partnerships. During these public-private partnerships, our main goal is to make sure that the needs of government and the needs of the private sector, as I mentioned earlier, are met. But most importantly, we're also able to provide our insights as an industry association based on what we've observed in other parts of the world in a specific public-private dialogue that we may be involved in. Next slide. So as I finish my presentation, I think it's good to just discuss some of the recommendations we would present or we would be able to recommend to policymakers when it comes to addressing the matter at hand. One of them is, of course, being able to assign sufficient amounts of mobile spectrum. We do appreciate that perhaps the people in the room may not be directly involved in the issues of issuance of mobile spectrum, but this is something important, and being able to contribute to that conversation in one way or another, I think that would be great. We appreciate as well that central banks do have MOUs with their telco regulators, and being able to just ensure that sufficient amounts of spectrum are allocated is something that we believe central banks can be able to support, but whenever they work together with their counterparts in the telco space. I think it's also good for policymakers to avoid license terms and conditions that could discourage network investment and innovation and needlessly increase costs. The service provision for internet and these other connectivity issues is quite high, and it's important just to make sure that we drive the cost lower, and these cost implications can also be transferred to consumers who by and large can be able to enjoy more connectivity. It's important to reduce mobile specific taxes and fees that impede rollouts and harm internet affordability. And may I also need to add also taxation of the financial sector is something that needs to be approached cautiously. Last but not least, it's good to also allow a bit of flexibility when it comes to license conditions for quality service. I think we've also seen some challenges when it comes to some of the conditions required for quality of service. There's need to be able just to look at how this can be graduated instead of applying a one-size-fits-all on some of these things, particularly when you're looking at the issue of connectivity being a challenge in particular areas where connectivity might not really be good. I think it's also good to just ensure that all parties involved, particularly the private sector, are involved in conversations around formulation of policies and ensuring that at least the views of all who are involved are also incorporated whenever policies are drafted. Last slide. In terms of future, I think where we see some of these conversations ensuing or going towards and what we are doing as an industry association, we see an important role of creating digital and financial literacy for the people who use financial services. This is an area that will continue to be important. Number two, being able to create innovative financing models, particularly for handsets. I think this is something that we're also quite big on as GSMA, just to make sure that even as we're talking about offline, if we're able to empower consumers to also get connected to the internet, that is something that we are big on. We are still exploring AI. It's still a very new thing, but there's opportunity to see what we can be able to leverage, particularly when it comes to digital financial literacy and how we can be able to empower consumers. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I welcome questions. I don't know if I'll be answering questions at the end or now.
Yep, thank you so much for your presentation. We already have questions and people raising hands. So just to let you know, we have a Q&A session after all of our speakers have finished presenting. So we'll ask the questions then. So till then, feel free to write your questions in the chat box. And thank you so much, Mr. Kennedy, for highlighting the critical role of mobile networks in bridging digital infrastructure gaps, and also your example of how GSMA Mobile has improved connectivity for over 50 million people in underserved regions shows how important these solutions are for financial inclusion and better connectivity, and how partnership is really important in this area. So thank you so much. And we now turn to our next speaker. So our second speaker is Mr. Brian Mutiara, who's the Executive Head of Mobile Financial Policy and Regulation at Vodacom. Mr. Brian will share his experience and expertise on the technologies enabling offline DFS and their role in reaching underserved areas. So I'll pass the floor to you.
All right, thank you very much, Tammy. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all participants. So my name is Brian, and I lead the mobile financial policy and regulatory work at Vodacom Group, which entails providing regulatory support to our colleagues in the operating markets. We operate in 8 markets in Africa, including Egypt. But our core mobile financial service, the M-Pesa product, is available in 6 countries. That's Lesotho, Mozambique, DRC, Tanzania, and in the 2 Safaricom markets, that's Kenya and Ethiopia. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is the M-Pesa mobile financial service that's available in those 6 countries. I think the first point to make is that Kennedy obviously works at the GSMA, which was my former employer as well, and has spoken broadly for the industry. So I will not repeat what Kennedy has said, even though a lot of what he said was part of my delivery here. What I will emphasize is that mobile money in and of itself is an offline product. As Kennedy mentioned, it runs on various, I would say, interfaces, which do not necessarily require an internet connection. We have SIM toolkits or SDK. We have USSD, which Kennedy has spoken about, but we also have mobile app availability, which is used by, I would say, a small proportion of our customers. Now, for the mobile money platform to actually work, it needs a mobile network, and I think Kennedy has also spoken about the dependency of mobile money on mobile network availability. And critical to this or core to this would be the availability of base tower stations, which are connected through relevant radio connectivity devices to the network, and from which the mobile money service can then be available. Kennedy has spoken a lot around the low connectivity scenarios. I think I'll focus on the scenarios where there is zero connectivity. I think Yemi's initial slide when this session was beginning was of a disaster sort of scenario. So I'll be talking about, what happens in those sort of disaster situations. I think the first thing to talk about is the circumstances that lead to the low network conditions, or the zero network conditions. The first of which is what Tammy mentioned, which is loss of power. Loss of power could arise from various, because of various reasons. One could be loss of the grid power, which could be as a result of maybe government action, or the grid suppliers, rationing power, or load shedding, as we call it here in South Africa. It could be as a result of theft or damage to the emergency power supply, which could be solar or even batteries. In South Africa, we face a huge challenge of theft of batteries in our base tower stations, which effectively puts out those base tower stations out of connectivity. And what that means is that people around that area are denied connectivity. As some of you may be aware, a base tower station is typically a 30-meter tall tower, which, depending on the circumstances, depending on the terrain, depending on whether there's any sort of obstructions, could cover anywhere from a few hundred meters to several kilometers, even up to 8 kilometers in some cases. It also depends on the nature of the spectrum, or the radio frequencies that are being used for connectivity. So, for instance, 2G connections, if it's a tower that only has 2G, it typically would cover a much broader area than a tower that has 3G. 2G runs on low frequencies, which have broader coverage, whereas 4G, 3G run on very high frequencies, which have shorter coverage areas. So that's sort of the connection between the loss of power and lack of connectivity in the areas covered by that base station. Another could be base station sabotage. Now, this happens in some very unique cases. In Kenya, for instance, in northern Kenya, close to the border with Somalia, Safaricom suffers a lot of loss of towers arising from terrorism acts. And what you'd find is that the terrorists would bring down a tower prior to a major attack. So they would ensure that there's no means of communication by the security forces or even the local communities before they attack. And this is a common occurrence. It's often not possible to provide security to all our towers. And sometimes these things happen without, with little notice. It's the question of whether it's preventable, I guess, is debatable. And another reason could be because of protests in Mozambique. Currently, some of you may be aware, has been going through a number of protests since the election results were announced. And I guess as collateral damage arising from those protests, there's been a lot of damage to property, private property, and so on. So we've lost a number of towers which have been damaged by the protesters or by vandals, not necessarily the protesters. And this again takes those towers out of network coverage and denies the people living there access to communications and also access to, I guess, mobile financial services, the M-Pesa service. Lastly, disasters like wars and severe weather conditions could actually take out these towers. In DRC, the east of DRC, there's a raging war between the government and rebel forces, and often our towers also get caught in the crossfire. We also have issues of severe weather in Mozambique through the cyclone. Some of you will remember the cyclone in 2019, which or the cyclones in 2019, which caused a lot of damage right up to I believe Malawi. And a lot of people were cut out of from their families and friends and from lack of the towers basically coming down. So these are the scenarios which sort of lead to these zero or low connectivity areas. So what infrastructure then is needed immediately and in future to ensure that digital financial services can function in these sort of zero connectivity or low connectivity scenarios? I think the first sort of form of infrastructure that would be necessary, in my view, would be any kind of infrastructure that provides first communication connections. And by first communication connections, I mean communication tools that allow the disaster workers, the aid workers, supporting people in these places to be able to communicate. It's very important, yes, for people to communicate amongst themselves and for people to have means of payment, but I think it's far more important for the aid workers to have a means of being able to reach these people so that additional help can be brought. And this is via satellite communication. So mobile operators like Vodacom works closely with satellite providers in these disaster zones, and of course collaborating with government in deploying sort of satellite solutions that provide for these emergency aid solutions to enable the aid workers coordinate the provision of aid. And this could be food, water, and other essential supplies like medicines. But I believe also that we should not treat communications, generally communications through mobile phones, as secondary to food, water, and medicines. I think it's equally important because it could be people who are in dire situations who only need to send one message or make one call for help to reach them. And therefore, I would say, and I think Kennedy also raised this point, that it is important to have some form of assurance on spectrum availability to deploy necessary network infrastructure that would allow communication, even if it's emergency infrastructure being deployed in those zones. Because what happens in disaster times is people will collect in certain areas. When network planning is being done by mobile operators, the assumption is basically, the network is built based on the dispersal of the population in a particular area, but also based on the terrain of that particular area. But when there's a disaster, whether it's war, floods, or any other sort of natural disaster, you'll find that people seem to concentrate in certain areas. And when there's that concentration of people, the network in that area may not necessarily be enough to provide sufficient coverage for the people in that area. So you either need to enhance the network, either increase the frequencies, or build more infrastructure. And for this to happen, you obviously need the network facilities for it, which is the spectrum availability, which Kennedy referred to. So network access is one of the key infrastructure requirements, spectrum and network access. In terms of policy recommendations, I won't repeat what Kennedy has said, but I think the first policy recommendation, and maybe it's not necessarily a policy recommendation, but an acceptance that in times of crisis or disaster, lack of communications is also a humanitarian issue. The inability of people to communicate, whether it's using voice data or even mobile financial services for basic financial services transactions, should be seen as a humanitarian issue. And it is therefore necessary, I suppose, for governments, the mobile operators, and other stakeholders to know what the network coverage gap is in times of disaster. So it's important to ensure that there's some means of measuring the humanitarian coverage gap in times of disaster. It's not, it's no longer, mobile communications are no longer a good to have during times of disaster, but I think they're an essential tool, just like food, water, and medicine. Secondly, I'll emphasize the need for government incentives, especially when it comes to equipment that is necessary to build the infrastructure. The government incentives could be in the form of tax breaks on imported network infrastructure. It could be maybe lower customs duties on this infrastructure and so on. Because then this just makes it easier to deploy this infrastructure, and not necessarily in times of disaster, but at all times, because nobody knows when these disasters strike, and you cannot just start importing the equipment when the disaster strikes. You need to have this equipment sitting somewhere in storage, available to be deployed as and when there's a disaster. And lastly, I would say that it's essential to have collaboration between the government, the mobile network operators, the regulators, and the aid workers in times of disaster like this. That collaboration proved essential in providing relief to customers or at least the people in Mozambique and Malawi during the recent cyclones. And I think it's something that needs to be built on, that we don't always go to government when we're looking for, regulatory reform, but I think collaborating with government in trying to alleviate the suffering of people during times of disaster is equally important. So thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Brian. Your emphasis on zero connectivity and real practical challenges that countries currently face was a great point to think on, especially how in times of crisis, lack of connectivity is actually beyond finance, but it also becomes a humanitarian issue. Was such a great point that I'm also taking with me today. So last but not least, I'll call upon our third speaker. Our final speaker for today is Ms. Jacqueline Mper, who is a DFS expert and currently works as the head of agency banking at EcoBank Group. And Ms. Jacqueline will share insights into the opportunities and challenges related to offline DFS solutions and how we can move forward together. So Ms. Jacqueline, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tammy. Thank you to Afi, the organizers. Adeyemi, thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Brian and Kennedy for your submissions. I've gleaned so much, and it's interesting how we seem to share the same views, and the trajectory is the same. As I present, you would realize how we're all in sync. I'd like to say thank you to GSMA. Kennedy, I manage agency banking for EcoBank Group, and there isn't much data. So usually when I need information, I have to go to the state of the industry report and try to just approximate to see what I can get for agency banking. So thanks for that. I am Jacqueline Mpari once again, head of agency banking at EcoBank Group. EcoBank is a Pan-African bank. We have presence in 33 plus countries in Central Africa, the West, Southern, and then the West and then Southern Africa as well. I will just move on very quickly because there's a lot that has been shared. And I believe Kennedy shared a lot of statistics about people being in areas that do not have coverage. I have checked the World Economic Forum, and found out that about 50%, nearly 50% of the world's population in rural and remote areas do not have reliable access to internet. And that is where it all starts for you to be able to be connected, to access digital financial services. And 35% of people in developing nations also do not have internet compared to the 80% in more developed nations. We've talked a lot of about infrastructure, and so I will not belabor that point. But the key theme for me that resonates throughout the conversation is collaboration. And as I progress, I believe that's where I'm going to land. That's stakeholder engagement, collaboration. Brian said it, Kennedy said it, and that is very important. Tammy, can we move on? I will also not really spend much time here on this slide because we have talked a lot about the challenges, and I believe the challenges are the reasons why we're here in the first place. What I would want to emphasize would be regulatory constraints. And Brian and Kennedy, I realized that you did not make reference to financial service providers. You forgot to mention as stakeholders. And coming from the financial services background, we're heavily regulated as banks, and we're very careful. And what I have come to realize is that the regulatory constraints that we have because many a time service providers, especially from the financial services, are not able to demonstrate our capacity to monitor and control digital financial services, because really that is not how we started, like a typical telco. And through engagements, we realized that policymakers and regulators are able to relax their stance, and they are very supportive and progressive. And I believe that Brian mentioned that there's been about 15% increase in usage and then adoption of mobile money through partnerships and then regulatory reforms as well. Another important thing is the cost that is involved, and this has to do with the private sector and then the public sector, and all players within the ecosystem. And partnerships have been mentioned by both speakers, and it is very important because increasingly we realize that one service provider is not able to deliver a complete solution. There are costs involved, and when we come together as partners, we're able to reduce the cost involved in delivering services. And I will sound like this because I am coming from the banking industry, and like every other industry, it has to make business sense. And that because that's how we sustain our business. And when we collaborate, each and every one of us plays to our strengths. The opportunities are vast. I mean, we can move on. And the opportunities that I decided to focus on are opportunities that are within arm's length, opportunities that you can actually see around you. And there's the excellent use case of mobile money, which both speakers have talked about. We as banks have had instances where we have deployed offline POS. There's a classic use case from Ghana where we had eSwitch, which was biometric as well, and it could facilitate offline transactions. And we also, I can't talk about this without talking about the agent network, which I am mandated to build and manage for agency banking. And I believe that extending agent networks in remote areas can also help, coupled with education and also the cost of devices, as our two speakers have talked about. These are use cases that exist today in different parts of the world, and we can actually enhance, we can increase adoption through education, through collaborations, and also scale up. So those are the opportunities that I would want us to bear in mind and focus on. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yes, there are very innovative solutions that have been talked about, but working from the known to the unknown. What do we have in hand? What do we see around us that still have not been able to reach certain remote areas that we can send to those areas? So finally, I would like to talk about collaborations, and it's all about collaboration. And this point cannot be overemphasized. Tammy, you can move ahead. This point cannot be overemphasized because we can only achieve our goals with collaboration. There are use cases like Rwanda having been able to extend internet access to many remote areas. We've talked about mobile money and collaboration between all stakeholders, policymakers, the UN agencies, organizations like AFI, GSMA, having round table conversations, webinars, forums like this to discuss how we can collaborate to be able to answer these questions, to be able to solve problems, gaps in infrastructure, just basically to work collectively to be able to deliver digital solutions. The World Economic Forum formed the Addison Alliance, and their mandate is to ensure that 1 million people by 2025 have access to digital technology to come out of digital exclusion. And as we work together with these organizations, as private sector, public sector, I believe that the costs we've talked about can be reduced, and taxes, as Brian mentioned, taxes on infrastructure can be very heavy, and the government can just support the industry to be able to reduce these taxes, tax holidays where necessary, to be able to bring in infrastructure and have them set up even ahead of disasters, as we've talked about. And from, again, a banking background, I will talk about services as well, being able to design client-centric services that people need to be able to meet their needs. An excellent example is not just mobile money, but the value-added services like M-Shwari, the M-Pesa, being able to pay merchants, and all of these through the USSD rail are amazing. One of the things that I would want us to ponder over as I conclude is sustainability. And sustainability, because all the stakeholders bear some amount of cost, some degree of cost, being able to deliver services, be it fintech, financial institutions, organizations like GSMA, even the regulators, to be able to have the capacity to monitor in the rural areas, communities where offline transactions are happening. And in our discussions, roundtables, as we talk and collaborate, we also need to find a sustainable business case around that. And I believe that will be able to help us to scale and be able to reach the last mile, not leaving anyone behind. Thank you very much, Tammy.
Sorry, thank you so much, Ms. Jacqueline. Your emphasis on regulatory constraints and cost constraints was a really great point that we also need to address to truly enable offline DFS. And throughout today's session, I think all of our speakers continue to highlight the importance of collaboration, cooperation, and at the end of the day, cooperation is really crucial for us to build the digital infrastructure that overcomes challenges faced by the underbanked and underserved population. So as we have mentioned at the beginning of our session, we really want today's session to be very interactive, and we want to make sure that all the questions that our members have will be answered. So I think I'll start taking questions from the floor, which we already have. So I'll start reading the questions, and I hope our speakers and even our members can answer if you want to intervene. So the first question that we have here is, Sorry, I think. Okay, so this one is from Awadala. So you speak about offline DFS. So what about the security issue related to using of USSD and SMS? I think this question came in during Kennedy's part. So maybe Kennedy, you can start answering, and if our other speakers have points to add on, you can also intervene and answer this question.
All right, thank you for the question. I think just to answer on the issue of security, I'd like to just confirm and emphasize that mobile money service providers have the latest tech when it comes to mitigating fraud. And so it would really depend on the kind of security threat that we have in mind. Well, if it's an issue of system security and accessing, mobile money systems, the industry has invested in technology that is not only able to detect fraud, but it's also able to, avoid it from happening. I may not be the best person to speak about the tech, but I do understand that it's the systems that we have are foolproof, and there's always a 24/7 surveillance when it comes to who can access the system. And I'm talking about things like hacking the system or anything like that. But then again, mobile money services are also protected by solutions such as PINs and passwords, basically to authenticate whoever can be able to access a mobile money account. And so mobile money customers are actually educated on how they can be able to access their wallets. There is no single wallet within the mobile money ecosystem that you can access without a PIN. And what the industry has also done is gone further ahead to create awareness on how consumers can be able to safeguard their PINs. We do understand that there's a lot of different cases or situations where they could be able to compromise this very sensitive information. But mobile money agents have been particularly very useful in disseminating information to customers on how they can be able to safeguard this very sensitive, delicate information, such as PINs and passwords, and the type of security access that one may require to have to be able to access not only a phone but also a wallet. So again, just to emphasize that systems are actually quite secure. And in the very limited cases where there are issues, I think we continue to innovate, obviously, just to be able to stay ahead of the curve. But there's assurance that services are safe.
Thank you so much. And did any of our other speakers wanted to add on to what Kennedy has said?
I think Brian can also add to what they do at Vodacom.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, well, I think Kennedy has answered it well. The technologies we use are subjected to a lot of penetration tests, and not just by the mobile provider themselves, but by the regulators as well from time to time. So the regulator may sometimes commission a third party information security firm to conduct penetration tests on the various access interfaces. Like I mentioned, the key access interfaces are the SIM toolkit and USSD. SMS is only used to communicate the outcome, just as banks also use SMS to communicate with their customers the outcome. But in terms of the interface between the customer and the platform, that is by the SIM toolkit and the USSD, which are pretty much quite secure. I don't think there have been incidences that I'm aware of where there has been any sort of successful penetration by hackers into the platforms. A lot of the fraud events that are registered on mobile money platforms would typically be either internal fraud or social engineering fraud, where customers play on other customers. But I'm not aware of any sort of successful penetration tests or penetration by hackers on the mobile money platforms. So I'll just reiterate that, what Kennedy has said, that the platforms are actually quite secure.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. So I also noticed that we had Chitundu raise their hand, so you may ask your question now.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to all the presenters for the good presentation. My question is on is directed at Kennedy from GSMA. As you may be aware, okay, I'm from Zambia. I'm from the Bank of Zambia. As you may be aware, the effects of climate change they've negatively impacted the supply of power in most African countries. And Zambia is a very good example. We experienced a drought last year, and this year is also not looking very good. So the effects of this has been that power generation has significantly reduced, which in turn has affected the availability of network, because many communication towers rely on electricity for them to to be in service. So a lot of the MNOs have relied on their business continuity programs, which have been stretched to the limit because they have had to spend extra monies to finance alternative power sources like diesel for their generators or solar panels. And also, we've noticed a significant reduction in the quality of service, both on GSM and also the subsequent services like mobile money, where we have a lot of service outages. So I just wanted to find out from GSMA, because there was a mention of an objective to increase penetration of the services in rural areas. Is GSMA aware of this problem, how climate change is affecting countries like Zambia, the remote people in Zambia or similar countries? And then what is the strategy to tackle this challenge? Thank you.
Thank you, Chitundu. I think that's an excellent question. I think as we are aware about the impacts of climate change, I think it's a global phenomena, and we're seeing a lot of things, be it increased rainfall in months where perhaps this never used to happen, or any other case that could be. You've raised a very important issue that sometimes the impact of these very severe climatic changes could actually impact power supply. And this is really something that perhaps we are not able to foresee, or rather we were not able to foresee previously. However, in as much as power disruptions has an impact on network connectivity, we have noted that renewable energy solutions, particularly solar power ones, are becoming increasingly common, just to be able to mitigate such cases. And this is something that started way back, even because obviously electricity connectivity is something that has been a big challenge, particularly in Africa, and particularly in corners where network connectivity was required, and most importantly, mobile money. Now, coming back to the issue of renewable energy solutions, these can play a very an especially important role in providing energy to cell sites designed to function off-grid, and to serve particularly remote rural communities. Cost-efficient and often environmentally friendly fuel cell generators could revolutionize this. And so this is also a mitigative measure that service providers, together with their partners, are able to implement to be able to mitigate such severe cases. The ability of some of these innovations to generate power could make them suitable for even the most remote deployments. And this has been quite successful. But then again, there's something important that I mentioned when I was speaking earlier, And this is in some of the business models that could be explored in such scenarios. And one of them is on energy as a business model for connectivity. Operators act as energy service companies, providing both connectivity and off-grid energy solutions to communities. This is something that could be leveraged, particularly for solar power and battery storage for revenue generation. So there's room to also innovate around some of these things, particularly on energy service provision, among others, being some of the things that we are currently exploring and also advocating for as a mitigative measure compared to, electricity grids not being available.
If I may add, and maybe not specific to Zambia, I think this goes back to the point that we raised on the need for collaboration between all the stakeholders, the mobile network operators, the regulators, the government, including the banks. We're not forgetting the banks here. I'll speak of a solution that we had here in South Africa when we were facing load shedding, where Vodacom was able to first deploy several thousand solar panels on our rooftops, on our campus, as well as in our parking areas. And what we've done is entered into what we call a virtual wheeling agreement with Eskom, which is the national power generating company. And through that virtual wheeling agreement, we're able to sell back power to Eskom and then buy it back at preferential rates. And that power is then used to power basically our based out stations and so on. So there are solutions that the private sector can actually come up with in collaboration with the government or government agencies, power companies and so on, to address this power shortage issue where it occurs. And that's just one example. I'm sure there are many others. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. So before I continue reading questions from the chat box, I was notified that we also have a special intervention from, I'm so sorry, I think I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, Ihutuku from Chief Marketing Communication Officer at Shared Agent Network Expansion Facilities in Nigeria. So SANEF, in short, also has played a very pivotal role in expanding agent banking networks to underserved areas in Nigeria. So please also provide your insights and experts into the innovative solutions in addressing these challenges in rural areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. Yes, thank you for having me. My name is, as she said, Ihechukwu Ibeji. I'm the Chief Marketing Communications Officer for SANEF Limited. SANEF Limited, SANEF, of course, acronym for Shared Agent Network Expansion Facilities, has been a key player in advancing financial inclusion, especially through agent banking in Nigeria. And this is, of course, very crucial in addressing several of the challenges associated with the delivery of digital financial services, DFS, especially in underserved touch points or areas, and of course, offline environments. Specifically, some of the contributions that we have made in this direction is in expanding access to financial services, promoting financial literacy, training and empowerment, bridging the identity gap, especially in supporting the enrollment of BVN, and of course, account and wallet creation. This is very important, as you all well know, that SANEF in itself is an initiative of the central bank, supported by the deposit money banks. So essentially, it's all about a lot of collaborations, especially with the licensed super agents and mobile money operators in pushing this forward. And so, very importantly, some of this intervention is we've been strategically focused on rural underserved areas, ensuring that banking services reach these communities that lack traditional brick and mortar. on in this direction. Expansion of the agent banking network. I recall we managed 500,000 by December 2020 by collaborating with CBN licensed super agents / mobile money operators and banks. And at the end, we had surpassed this by 561,000 agents by December 2020. And since meeting that mandate, we've continued to act as an enabler and coordinator of all stakeholders to widen and deepen financial access point. And if you look at that expansion of agent network between 2018, when we came into the landscape of collaborating with these key stakeholders, from 83,560 in 2018, we have today about 1.9 million, over 1.9 million agents as of November 2024, which has been achieved in collaboration with collaboration with banks and super agents. So this onboarding has come to over 1.9 million agents as of now. And these agents have been made available in all of the 704 local government areas in the country, across the 6 geopolitical regions in the country. We also collaborated with the regulators and key financial inclusion stakeholders to provide favorable policy for agent banking viability, and also to drive, very importantly, cash in, cash out SQL services have continued to dominate transactions at agent locations. So some of these stakeholders that we have also helped to address connectivity challenges through a combination of offline compatibility technologies, multi-network solutions, and extensive trainings. Very importantly, also in a very key format, is to let you know that across the agent locations, they've been able to process on an annual average of 1.5 billion transactions. And these are all led to the interventions through collaborations with these key stakeholders. And just to quickly maybe round up, these interventions have been driven by through seven key objectives that we've done, which is agent expansion, account opening, products and services at the agent locations, technology solutions through a SANET technology platform, policy advocacy, which is keenly led by our handshake with the regulators and other stakeholders to provide an enabling environment, a stakeholder engagement, and of course, financial literacy training and awareness. And these are some of the key interventions that SANEF Limited, just in a nutshell, have continued to play in this ecosystem in advanced financial inclusion and the challenges with DFS. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for all the great questions and the contributions and the interventions. And it's so exciting learning all of the various experiences we have in this virtual workshop. And I would also like to focus on the policy implications and considerations for us going forward. So do we continue to design our digital financial services ecosystem to support offline DFS, such as offline retail CBDC? And we also have a question related to that in our chat box. So it was by Adeline. It was asked that, what do you think about offline CBDC, and can it actually be a better option? So I think I'll direct this question to Ms. Jacqueline first, and also for our other members, how do you think we can also build future resilience for our DFS ecosystem as a whole? So thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. We should definitely be intentional in making sure that we have offline solutions. In the beginning, I believe that Yemi had mentioned, was a question that he put out there. Do we have to be intentional? Yes, we have to be intentional. Nonetheless, we need to work towards a more sustainable solutions to ensure that there's access to internet, to ensure that all the new innovations like AI come into play, to be able to make sure that we are delivering financial services and making sure that everybody is financially and digitally included. I would just mention, now that I have the opportunity to speak, on what our colleague from SANEF talked about. Again, the bottom line is collaboration. There's another use case of such an organized agent network, ABC, in Uganda. And I would like to say that one of the challenges that we see in the banking industry with constraints to reaching the last mile or trying not to leave anybody in the remote area behind is KYC, which is very popular globally. And there's actually a company called Marriott that has a solution that is you can use to onboard customers. And that, I believe, is a stopgap measure that we can actually explore as being intentional in using offline solutions until we have more sustainable solutions or until we have everybody in a remote area in a coverage area. This solution is actually able to send encrypted pictures, which is very important, and pictures of IDs to be verified when you're onboarding customers in offline areas. So these are some of the solutions that we can explore. And yes, we must be intentional, have it as a stopgap measure, or in the event that we don't have internet. Thank you.
Thank you. So did any of our other speakers or members wanted to contribute to that specific question? If so, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tammy. If I may just step in. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for contributing, for the exciting questions. First of all, I'd just like to remind or ask Kennedy, Brian, and Jackie, if you don't mind, do look at the questions on the chat, and if you can respond to a few of them, please do. Again, given the time we have, I will, again, the last question asked by Tammy, I think it's a very relevant one. So I'd like to encourage every colleague, again, I can see a few colleagues here, and I know what you've been doing in your respective countries. If you would not mind just sharing in a minute or two, again, what you think about this topic of, again, continuing to promote DFS in offline environments. And then we can think about it beyond just the telco and mobile money. We can think about it from even severe scenarios where, like we saw in Tonga, in 2022, where they had an earthquake, and for 5 weeks, the entire country had a total blackout because it was a massive earthquake that shook the entire nation. We've seen this with submarine cables being cut. We've seen this with CloudStrike in continental US, where they were offline for a bit. So again, systems fail, infrastructure, even with the redundancies, might fail. Then the question we have as regulators really is, what do we do? Do we intentionally design for future opportunities or future products such as retail CBDC that would act like cash, even when we have failures, they still continue to work? If the answer is yes, then what do we have to do as regulators? Do we have gaps in our policies that we think we need to address? If the answer is also yes, how do we address them? What should we start thinking about? What kind of questions do we take back as a working group and start to, again, work on those? And I'd like to hear just a few, again, your thoughts, your comments, your feedback from a few colleagues, so we can actually have these insights to go on. And again, a big thank you to Tammy for supporting with this. So I just wanted to highlight this quite quickly. If I have volunteers, please raise your hands and just share with us your thoughts in a minute or two about the conversation so far and what you think we should focus on going forward. And if nobody volunteers, I would call on my friends. So please, let's have this conversation. Let's have it engaging. Thank you very much. Anyone would like to go first? Okay, then I'll call on you. Umpo, will you go first? From your point of view, what do you think we should think about? And after you, I'll probably ask Nivo to do the same. Just share with us your thoughts and what you think we can focus on going forward. Are you there? Nivo, can you share something?
Hello, everyone. Thank
Oh,
you, Adini.
no worries, thanks.
It's a pleasure to be here. I think we have experienced this problem of blackout in Madagascar, and this topic is very interesting for us. But there are many challenges that we face about DFS, and I think I can learn from you today. So thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments, contributions from colleagues? Igor, anything interesting you think? What do you think we can focus on from North Macedonia's point of view? And again, you can, if you're not able to speak, you can also put them in the chat. We would appreciate it just for us to have some insight on what we should focus on going forward. Okay, I'll pass the floor back to you now, Tammy. Again, if we can close the conversation. Okay, yeah, Edith, thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Edith from Ghana. And really, I'd like to say thank you for this workshop. And it is very important and strategic that you have brought in the telco and the bank. And yes, in extending agency banking and in extending the bank network to outside the branch, we do need the telcos to ride on their network. So yes, it's very, very important. And when we were sharing information on areas where there is no telco network connectivity, I was wondering how. And then we also went ahead to talk about the fact that it relies on electricity. And also we brought in the solar panel assistance. And so yes, it's important that we're looking at these other alternatives because we need connectivity everywhere else that we want to extend digital financial services and financial inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edith. Really appreciate that. Any other contributions or ideas from colleagues in terms of something we can look at in the future? Do you think it's something worth pursuing at the working group level? Again, very happy to hear your thoughts on this. But again, that's just my quick intervention. I would pass the floor back to you now, Tammy. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the interventions, Nivo and Edith. That is really great. And since we're a little bit over time, I'm not sure, Yemi, if you wanted me to continue reading all the questions, but I think
that since we're right on time, again, I think some of the questions are quite similar from what I see. They stem more around security and all, and I see Kennedy as, again, thank you so much for that. Provided some reference to how security has been addressed. So I think we are quite good. Except someone has any specific questions you think the speakers should address, we are very happy to take that now. Otherwise, I think we could just move towards closing, given that we're right on time. But before we do that, colleagues, we always like to capture the moment. So we would like to ask, again, just for a brief second, if you don't mind, switching on your cameras, just for us to, again, capture this moment and again, recognize everyone that did participate. So this will just take a second for us to have a picture for our news article. So yeah, I would ask that you help with this. Let us know when you're ready.
Okay. Okay, let me count to 3, yeah? Okay. 1, 2,
I think
3.
we still have a lot of people with their cameras off.
Yes, there will be multiple photos, so please bear with me, okay? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Wait, more, one more, more, no more. Wait, gallery. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, again, one last time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. I think we've got everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ira. Amy, back to you.
Yeah, thank you for the photos and for everyone turning on their cameras. So as we come to the end of today's virtual workshop, I really want to express my gratitude and thanks to all of our speakers for their very insightful contributions, and to all of your very active participations in the chat box for asking questions and for all the interventions, despite being called on. So we've explored a lot of challenges and the opportunities of enabling DFS in offline environments and shared solutions, and really showed that how critical role of collaboration is so important in driving financial inclusion. So I think it's really important for us to carry forward the insights we gained today and not just leave it as a workshop for today. So I think we also have, okay, that's on the next slide. So thank you so much to everyone. Your input was valuable in shaping our future discussions and workshops. And thank you once again for being part of this very important conversation. For sure, I know I have learned a lot from our speakers today. And from my side, I'm very thankful. And I'll pass the floor to Adeyemi for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Amy. I would just like, can you change the slides to evaluation? Yes. So colleagues, before you go, we will just ask that you take a minute. It's actually just roughly 4 questions on how the webinar was it relevant? How did you find the speakers and all that? We would love your feedback so we can improve. So please do take a minute to scan quickly and provide your feedback. And while you do that, I just want to say a big thank you and extend our appreciation from the DFS working group, first to the speakers, Kennedy, Brian, and Jacqueline, and also to you, Ike, for finding time to join this conversation. We do appreciate the time, the insight, and the contributions you've made. And to all of you colleagues who have found time to also join this conversation, thank you so much. We recorded this, so we'll be circulating both the recording and the slides for your reference later. But like I said, again, this is an ongoing conversation. So we expect to take this forward in the work plan and in the discussions of the DFS working group next year. At this note, I would like to say a very good rest of the day to the rest of you. I think for us in Asia, it's what, 9:38 p.m. So I think we will be going to bed. But for you colleagues in Latin America, in the Pacific, very early in the morning. And for you colleagues in Africa, enjoy the rest of your day. But please, before you go, we really do implore that you provide some feedback and respond to the evaluation. Thank you very much. And again, enjoy the rest of your day.